Perhaps, like me, you stared into your coffee or your tea this morning. What do you say? Can you say? I am heartbroken and I'm disgusted. I have a dream. We all here have a dream about what our home can be, what our home nation ought to be. There are things that seem to make a lot of sense to do in order to change our nation's relationship to violence. As has been pointed out ad nauseum, other nations have people who are struggling with mental illness. We're not alone in that sense. Other nations have people who have access to firearms. We're not alone in that sense either. Other nations don't struggle the way that we do, and given that there's already hundreds of millions of guns in our society, it doesn't seem like more guns are going to fix us. We all have a dream about what our nation ought to be, and it feels like that dream has been actively dying for a while. I have attended many vigils. I've spoken at several vigils for numerous mass shootings, and somewhere along the way in the last few years I decided I didn't want to organize or participate in another vigil for a mass shooting. I'll go march to Washington, but I'm not going to light another candle for gun violence and then blow it out and go home, which sounds callous, uncaring, as if I'm somehow frowning or disapproving if you were to choose to do that, and I certainly am not doing that or don't intend to do that. But it now feels to me that when we light a candle, and we say our prayers and we send out our thoughts, we are joining with the same people who could make a change in this equation and don't. We're joining with people that have power to enact beneficial, perhaps painful in the short term, but beneficial in the long-term change in our society and don't. Those who would join with us in prayers and in lighting a candle are actively trying to destroy our dreams at the same time as they too offer prayers. Yesterday, the President, Melania, and I send our heartfelt thoughts and prayers. Mitch McConnell yesterday, Elaine's and my prayers go out to the victims of this tragedy. It has felt to me for some time that when it comes to gun violence, if we gather on our own lawns and our own parks and we light candles, we blow them out and go home, then we've come alongside the folks who are sending heartfelt thoughts and prayers. We might believe that we are doing something different, that we're of a different mindset, that we stand for different things, but when our actions in response to such tragedies are broadly equivalent, it's hard to offer a contradictory message. Now, the message seems to be we're all united in prayer in response to this senseless tragedy. And so prayer itself is a tool to destroy dreams. I much prefer the plea from Fosdick in his famous hymn, "Grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the facing of this hour." We all have a dream about what our home can be, what it ought to be, but it feels like that dream has been actively dying for a while now because there are folks who want the dream to be dead, to accept that all of this bloodshed is inevitable, that our children must grow up with lockdown drills, that you must think long and hard before going to the movies or a mall or a store, that it is ultimately inevitable that our dreams will die. I keep referring to a dream. What's the dream? It's just my dream. I'm sure your dream intersects with mine in some ways. My dream is simple. My dream is to solve this problem. And if that means melting guns, then melt them. And if that means more legislation, then write it. And if that means amending the Second Amendment so we can all agree that what it says is something that everyone understands, then amend it. If solving this problem means trying something different, then let's get crazy. Because for whom is the status quo actually working? I selected this chapter from Genesis for this morning, earlier in the week, because it's a wonderful narrative of intrigue, full of jealousy, anger, redemption, blessing, betrayal, but ultimately reconciliation against all the odds. It's a story of hope, but it sure doesn't start that way. You'll note how little God appears to be a part of the proceedings in chapter 37. God will show up later in the narrative when Joseph is in prison in order to not let Joseph's dream die. Joseph will go on to become Pharaoh's right-hand man in Egypt, will encourage Pharaoh to save up his grain because a famine will come. 7 years of good will be followed by 7 years of bad. So make sure you save during the good so that you'll be protected during the bad. Joseph's brothers will be sent by Jacob to Egypt to buy grain because they're suffering during the famine in Israel. Eventually, Joseph and his brothers are reunited and blessed by that reunification, and it is the dream that saves all of their lives, because Joseph is in authority in Egypt, and so all of them can live. The dream is hope. In this chapter, at the very beginning of their narrative arc, there is a dreamer, Joseph, who is 17 years old, and there are his older brothers who are the ones who seek to exterminate the dream. In this chapter, by the end of it, the dream appears to be dead because the dreamer appears to be dead, but neither of those things are true. Jacob is the father. He's a special guy in the Hebrew Bible. Like Joseph, his special son, he's born late, but exceeds his social position given to him by his birth position. You remember Jacob, he was a twin with Esau, born second, but he came out grabbing his brother's heel, stole his birthright, became the guy. For the boy who is late, Jacob spares nothing in lavishing him with special things. He enthrones Joseph with a beautiful garment. His love appears to be arbitrary, and it is that arbitrary love that traumatizes the older brothers. Because Jacob is partial, yet also because he is powerful, Jacob's arbitrary love causes them to resent the wrong person. The brothers resent Joseph for his dream about which he could do nothing. It was just a dream. But Jacob has agency. He's a powerful man who has overcome much to oversee a great deal. But rather than blame the one who had the power and acts with partiality, the traumatized ones lash out against the weakest party, scapegoating him for the absence of their father's affection. We see how the collective trauma, when unresolved, gets lived out here. Rather than that trauma helping the brothers build resiliency, they use their youngest and weakest brother as the object upon which they should pour their scorn and their jealousy. And their jealousy becomes hatred, and their hatred becomes violence, and it continues to go unchecked by their father. Sure, he joined them. He joined them in verse 11 in what is a brilliant little line, a brilliant little play within the story from the narrator. The brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. He keeps Joseph's dream close to his heart. He is two-faced, the text is saying. On the one hand, giving voice to their pain, joining them in saying that yes, there is a problem that needs to be sorted out, but privately encouraging the division among all of the children, quietly happy to see that nothing ever changes. Yet even though this family dynamic isn't actually working for the brothers, they have a deep sense of the threat of hope. You'd think that hope would be the thing that they're after. You'd think that a dream born of God would be something that they would want. You'd think that a better vision of the future would be preferable to what they've got, but hope is threatening to them. They spit on hope. They abuse the dream and the dreamer. By the end of the chapter, the brothers have got themselves so twisted into knots by their own trauma and deceit and abuse that they lie to their father's face about what happened. They don't even know who they are anymore. In this chapter, by the end of it, the dream appears to be dead because the dreamer appears to be dead. But neither of those things are true. The text will go on, and the text will go on to say that the dreamer isn't dead, and so the dream isn't dead. There is a modern parable in there somewhere. Every time I think the dream is over, every time the news hits, the dream starts to feel closer and closer to being dead. Every time the guns aren't melted and the legislation isn't written and the amendment isn't amended, God's people join together to pray and light a candle. The dream feels like it's dying. But it isn't. It isn't dead. Because our dreams, they're not dead. Are they?